Though change and loss are essential and universal to the human experience, we resist them. We resist them with a passion, we resist them kicking and fighting, and what it brings is greater suffering, greater pain. So I am here today to talk about my own journey through loss and to share some poems that have come from that journey. I've been challenged by the reality of great personal loss. So great that often friends around me, neighbors, don't know how to face it, don't know what to say. I tragically lost 3 siblings over the course of 2 years. First, my brother Jose passed after a long, fierce battle with cancer. 5 months later, my brother Georgie, died from a brain aneurysm. And then the following July, I lost my sister, who died when a delivery truck at work hit her. All 3 were very young, 52, 46, and 43. And despite the suffering of these losses, grief has been my teacher, and art has been my refuge. And that's why I'm here today. So it's curious what people would say, or people would not say. And I wanted to begin there because I think we have a terrible discomfort when someone that we know has this kind of loss. Often, I would hear, she's better off now, or this is God's way. None of that helped. The only thing that really helped was for someone to say, I don't know what it feels like, and yet I'm so sorry. And that made me feel that I had support. In Spanish, we have a wonderful expression, which I did hear in Spanish. My family's from Puerto Rico. And it is, te acompaño en tu sentimiento. And what it means is, I join you in your feeling. And I have often felt like, why is there not an expression like that in English that people could say? So maybe I'm going to pitch for that expression, the translation of that expression. Te acompaño en tu sentimiento. I join you in your feeling. Because that is about the solidarity of human experience and death being so universal and yet so silenced. Just yesterday, I had the pleasure to visit a school in the Kennett Square area where writers were converging for a Young Writers' Day. And a writer friend who's, actually she's an illustrator, when I told her about today and coming and being here with you and the topic of my talk, she shared with me something that I didn't know. And we've been friends for over 10 years. She said that when she was 22, her brother was killed in an accident. And so we began to talk about that, and she said, what was very odd is that I felt that my family was cursed. And I felt that no one, there was so much silence around it, no one wanted to acknowledge that this had happened. And that really struck me, so I wanted to share that with you. The stages of grief and the roads of grief are many, and they are never sequential. Some of the ones that I experienced were anger, denial, guilt, fantasy, and that's the one where this can't possibly be happening. Please pinch me, kick me, this can't be happening. And of course, the terrible crisis of faith. And those roads are all roads that you walk along, and you might hop over, you might go back to the one that you were at before, but that's the reality of dealing with grief. So today I invite you to ask yourself, what have you lost? Loss is not just in the form of death. Losing your fertility is a loss. Losing a partner, leaving a marriage is a loss. All of those are part of our experience, and yet we don't feel comfortable engaging and talking about our losses. In Spanish, another expression is destino común, la muerte, which means death, our common destiny. So today I urge you to please consider breaking the silence over our losses. Why? Because what we need to do is talk about them, to engage with one another, to be in solidarity with one another over our losses. I read every could get my hands on. I participated in bereavement support groups, which were very helpful because these are people who are going through the same thing I was going through. And of course, therapy. And so I did all of that, but what I found most helpful was writing poetry and creating art. And following the Mexican tradition of honoring our loved ones, I created shrines to my two brothers and sister, and they're outside if you want to take a look at them, pick them up, and I don't mind if you handle them. And they include pictures and boxes that I created that are shrines for them. I also found that the book by Elizabeth Lesser, Broken Open, was probably the most powerful thing that I could get my hands on. It's a book about all kinds of loss, but primarily a process that she calls the Phoenix process. And she has shared, she's a co-founder at Omega, and she has shared that every culture, every human culture has a Phoenix story. And you know that you're in the Phoenix process because you are feeling that your heart has broken in a million pieces, and sometimes you feel light. I felt very light, either very heavy or very light. And in this book, she talks about something called the gap, and it is that hole, that emptiness. And I was inspired to write this poem called The Gap. I think we don't do death well in this society, and I think part of the reason is that we don't know how to hold that sacred emptiness. And the poem is called The Gap. Do not be afraid. It cannot be filled. The gap, the hole, the space left open. Let it sit still and empty. Let it be a place of honor, of remembrance. The shoes, the shelf, the corner, the chair where they once sat. Allow yourself the time necessary, the tears necessary, the love necessary. Let it sit still and empty. You cannot fill it. God cannot fill it. Time cannot fill it. The gap. Do not be compelled to act, to do, to return. There. It is just a before. There is just a before. There's just a before and an after. Just sit. Thank you. Part of the challenge of Lola's passing in particular is that my parents are in their 80s. And my sister lived in Puerto Rico and was the primary person taking care of them. So it really reconfigured the family. Everything changed, the dynamics. And I felt that we were all trying to learn how to be a family again. And we're still in the process, though time has changed that, and we've learned strategies along the way. One of the things that's difficult is the date of her death. So whenever that date comes up, I'm not quite sure how I'm going to react, and it's July 21st. So the year after, on the anniversary, I called my mother. And of course, she is beginning to lose her memory, and I'm grateful for that, in part. And this poem is called July 21st, and it's about the conversation that we had on the phone. My mother cannot tell today's day or date. I count this as a strange, small blessing. I am glad not to remind her of the anniversaries of dead children. I am glad for light laughter, for how's the weather, and what did you eat today? She tells me it's raining, that the rice and beans were delicious. She tells me that for some reason she feels especially tired today. After a year of misery and longing, I am just beginning to understand the power of loss and memory. Yet in my solitude, in reflection and silence, I too rest in the power of love, of rain and rice, right here and now. Besides the shrines, the support groups, I also found letters to my siblings to be very, very helpful, and I wrote very detailed letters. Often we think of death as being the end, at least here in our society. I'm fortunate that in Puerto Rico there's a different acceptance of life and death and the relationship between the two. And I'm glad of that, but I am always bouncing between those two worlds, and it can be very challenging. I challenge you to ask yourself, what is the hardest thing you ever had to do? Because if I had imagined the hardest thing that I ever had to do before actually doing it, I don't think I could have taken the power of it. The hardest thing so far that I've had to do is to deliver the news to my mother that my sister passed. And yet, when I look back again, a gift, because it was, of course, I was on that flight first thing the next day, and my cousin picked me up at the airport. No one had the courage to tell her. My father knew, but she didn't know. So we arrived at the house, and I got ready, and when I did, of course, she screamed. And within 5 minutes, all of the neighbors were in our living room. And again, tending and giving testimony and supporting her. And at one point, a man who sang at the church next to where they lived brought his guitar to sing to her. Again, making room, not silencing, making space to actually engage and talk about our loss. I have one more, actually 2 more poems. This one is for Lola, and it's, I hope, hopeful. There is a quote, and it's a Buddhist teaching that reads, "The world is afflicted with death and decay. Therefore, the wise do not grieve, knowing the terms of this world." Loss. It was not lung cancer that took you away, as I had expected, but instead a fast car, a delivery truck rushing through life in the noonday sun, stopped us all dead in our tracks, suddenly robbing you from our gaze, leaving us to wonder, taking our time. No matter what we do, there's no way to prepare. Head and heart, there is no preparing ever truly. There is no preparing possible ever sufficient. We are all time hungry. We can pride ourselves of spiritual evolution, of good karma, working on ourselves until our fingers are bloody and blistered. To be like Jesus, Abraham, Buddha, to know the secrets to passwords, to the gates of heaven, the magic spells to God's praise. Still, your end arrives. You are transformed, now an angel, your ultimate wish. This was your ultimate wish. Now an orb of light, you spin and glow, watching my back in ways I could never, though I always longed to protect you. It is not God who is cruel, it is our own limited eyesight, mouse, not eagle, how trapped in bodies we forget we are souls in flight. Another book that I found funny and helpful is Byron Katie's book, 1,000 Names for Joy, which you may want to check out. I will leave you with a quote that is actually Krishna Das. I don't know if you're familiar with Krishna Das's music. And it comes from The Sun, which comes out of Chapel Hill in an interview. At the end it reads, Kisa Gotami was a poor village woman at the time of the Buddha. Her newborn son died, and she went to see the Buddha carrying her baby and asked, "Can you bring my baby back to life?" And he said, "Yes, but first you must go out and find some mustard seed from a home where nobody has died and bring it to me." Finally, she realized, after visiting many homes, that there was no one in the world who had not experienced the death of someone close to them. Freed from her grief, she mourned her child and then became a nun in the Buddhist tradition. She entered the order and became one of the liberated beings of that generation. And Krishna Das says, "We think we're tough with our little bit of pain, but these great beings are aware of the pain of everyone in the universe, and it doesn't shut them down. It just increases their compassion." Thank you.